go. So welcome to Telecaptivating Research Story webinar. We're going to be talking about some approaches and some strategies. I want to give you some things to think about that maybe you haven't thought about before. That's my hope, as well as for us to talk about then the structures that go into storytelling and why they're there and how it is that we might be able to work with those structures. We've done introductions in the chat. If you haven't introduced yourself, feel free to continue. And we're going to talk a little bit about titles. We'll talk about writing science and what makes science sticky, according to Joshua Schimmel. We'll talk about storytelling structures, writing with your readers in mind. Someone has already mentioned taking your work, your expert research and scholarship, and being able to retell it to non-expert audiences. And so I think that being able to keep your reader in mind, who is that audience, who's that reader, super helpful. And we'll talk a little bit about punchlines and endings and how those can be super helpful, even in science writing. All right. So along the way, I'm encouraging you to gather some takeaways, some things that you want to try out, some things that are intriguing to you that you want to read about further or explore further. I will share resources. I love sharing texts and ideas that you can go and find on your own as well. Just do a little bit more research. And so what are the things that you're going to want to take away and explore further? We can cover a lot in, a 30, 40-minute presentation and conversation, but it's going to take a long, more behind the scenes work to kind of build out those storytelling skills. So what are the takeaways that you want to take with you? And I think with any good story, with any good paper, article, book, whatever, you have an entrance way. You have a way that you're getting your readers engaged with your work and kind of giving them a place to enter. And so we'll talk about a little bit with titles and ideas. I'm going to pull, as I mentioned, from Joshua Schimmel's Writing Science book, and his very first line, his entryway in his first chapter is him saying, as a scientist, you are a professional writer. That is his first line. For those of you who don't identify as scientists, who identify perhaps as scholars or as social scientists or as me, literary critics or writing studies scholars, just know that you can take whatever that term is for scientist and plug in how you identify. As a researcher, as an academic, as a scholar of any sort, you really are a professional writer. It is the only way for you to build your name, your reputation in the field. It's also the best way for you to build your knowledge and your own understanding of what it is that you're doing. So some of that storytelling that happens is not just for others to be able to hear, but it's for you to be able to even explain to yourself sometimes what it is that you understand or are learning to understand through your research, through your scholarship. Think about the entryway and how it is that people make their way to your work, whether it be as a lay audience, lay reader, or someone who is engaging as an expert level. It's going to be a title, right? That title is where our eyes land first. It's kind of the thing that grabs our attention. It helps us identify whether we see something as being relevant or irrelevant. We're pretty savvy and quick now with being able to kind of scroll through and identify what are the things that we want to spend more time on and read. And so that title is the first way that a reader is going to encounter your work. That first impression, it always matters. And I love Wendy Belcher's idea that your title is the highway billboard to your article. And so if you think about like this one, this is an article that a colleague sent me. We're going to be looking at kind of the structure of articles in her group. And she loved the title on this one. The giant panda is cryptic. She said, it's not in my area of study. It's related, but kind of off the side. And she said, I just love the title. And so that's why she grabbed it for me. I think it's a great title too. Cryptic, by the way, has a couple different meanings, but apparently cryptic in terms of visual acuity and photography is about whether kind of edges or things blend. And it turns out that the giant panda, I would not have thought about this, but can blend into backgrounds pretty easily because of its black and white kind of coloring. So I thought that was interesting. Turns out, interestingly enough, also, there have been many studies done on how readers engage with academic writing and, of course, with titles. So this comes from a publication called The Conversation. And if you're not familiar with The Conversation, just look it up pretty quickly because it's a great way for us to get uh, expert writers who are then writing for non-expert, for lay readers. So it gives us that kind of access to something that's accessible, but so we don't have to be experts in the field. But we can be reading trustworthy, science-backed or scholarship-backed work. And it turns out that readers prefer to click on clear, simple headlines like this one. It's a good reminder. Clear, simple. Sometimes esoteric can be intriguing, but you're unlikely to get folks to click at that point. And there's a reason we want folks to be able to click with clear, simple titles. So I'm going to go with Joshua Schimmel's Writing Science, his book on how to write papers that get cited and proposals that get funded. Notice what's here that makes it memorable is that he connects a clear title, Writing Science. He just tells you what his book is about. But it's not just writing papers and writing proposals, it's writing a specific way to make sure that your papers get cited and that your proposals get funded. So that's the value proposition that he includes then in the title of his book. It's super smart. It helps us understand. Like I suspect that he has a lot more readers of his book now because he says it's papers that are going to get cited and proposals to get funded. So sometimes just simple little tweaks to a title or work can make it that much more compelling. But also know, again, we understand the value of it, right? It's not just that we're writing papers that are going to be cited. And that's, again, how you build your name and your reputation in the field is by citations, not just by publications, but by citations. We're going to take a portion of what it is that Joshua Schimmel has within his book. We'll talk about two different things. We'll talk about storytelling structures, and we're going to talk about making stories sticky. We'll start with the sticky part, just as we started with kind of making them memorable or engaging. We want to have stories that are engaging. So we're going to start with the idea of sticky. And I know this is a lot of text, so I'm going to read through it, and I'm going to focus on a couple different things. And actually, there should be another. There we go. So making a story sticky, he pulls this from a couple scholars who have studied stickiness, by the way. There are many ways to evaluate whether a story works, but perhaps the best is to ask, quote, how long after you read it do you remember it? Some stories are riveting while you read, but are gone as soon as you close the book. Perfect airplane reading. Others may stay with you for your entire life and be passed on to children. Some are so powerful that they have lasted intact from the dawn of civilization. So how do we write papers with legs? Papers with immediate impact, but that still accrue citations for years. And he talks about it being sticky, right? That'll be success. And we'll talk about that in a moment. And he says there are these fundamental good storytelling, and thus good to science writing, these kind of fundamentals. And the qualities of sticky are simple. Just talked about simple headlines, right? Titles. Something unexpected. Keeping things concrete as you're writing about them. Credible. Emotional. Oftentimes we don't think about emotion in our academic writing, but I guarantee you it's always, always, always there. And then stories. And it seems like, well, stories should be everything. And on the one hand, we could say that, but the stories in here, we're talking about structure and how we're structuring out our stories. So if you think about sticky, right, that kind of simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, emotional, and it's just a story. Most of it is here in this image of blueberry pancakes with syrup dripping down. The story, if you think about, there's action in this image, right? And the syrup that's kind of dripping down. I don't know if you look at it when you look at the image, if you can check and see what the emotion is. It may be something that you're like, oh, that looks really good. That's desirable. Or it might be like, I'm so full, I couldn't, eat another bite. like intrigue, but there's got to be something there, right? So this is an image that has all of those qualities too. So let's start with simple. And Schimmel reminds us that we're not talking about something that's simplistic, right? But we're talking about clear, right? Something that's simple, contains the core essence of an important idea in a clear, compact way. Simple ideas have power. I work with a lot of USGS and field ecologists, wildlife biologists in the federal government, interestingly enough. And some of the conversations that we've been having recently are about clearly messaging upward what it is that they're doing on the ground that's of value, the research that they're doing. And it's hard, I think, to convey upward sometimes the complexity. I mean, it's huge data sets, right? It's all these observations. It's complex, and they need to have simple ways to be able to describe it. Same thing here. If you look at figure one, right, we need to be able to show nitrogen flow and soil and availability and how that increases. And so you can be able to diagram very simply kind of complex processes. So ultimately, the ideas, you want to have simple explanation that captures the core of a problem, description. You want to have schemas. These are the kind of structures, those of models. And we'll go back to structures of meaning and note that by the end of any article, any piece that you've written, any report, people want to know what it means. So that kind of being able to structure things out in ways that takes people to meaning clearly. Here in the same thing with the image, right? Simple. And language, you want to have simpler terms and broadly held schemas. So you want to be able to keep the jargon to a minimum, or if you're using specialized language, to be able to identify how you're using it. Unexpected, right? That's what plucks the unknown within the mass of what is known to reveal something that's novel, something new and important. If you find yourself using the term novel, innovative a lot, it's in part because those have been the buzzwords and the catchwords for a lot of researchers over the past couple decades in order to be able to assert that their work has value, that it's doing something new as a contribution. But you might also think then about unexpected as an opportunity for you to grab what is new, what's new in your understanding, for example. So you could think about what are some of the examples of unexpected that you have found that's compelling in your own studies. What did you sometimes we talk about it as a gap in the field, that contribution being able to fill something, but a lot of us don't write to fill gaps. A lot of us write to create new understandings of perhaps old concepts or things like that. So what's unexpected in that, for example? That concrete, the element of concrete in storytelling, really, really important. Here you could substitute the term science for, could be social science, it could be in the humanities here, but thinking about what is it that's concrete. So if science is about data, data are concrete. Science is also about ideas, and ideas are abstractions, and the antithesis of concrete. So if you're thinking about how you get really caught up in all of the ideas that you want to explain to your readers, all of the background, all of the concepts, everything to get the kind of theory, everything laid out, if you get caught up in that, consider how much of that is abstraction that you have spent a long time reading, having conversations, learning about, trying to build out your own understanding, your own kind of internal schema of all of these ideas. And then once they're there and you've made new connections and you're like, I have new ideas that I can share, just recognize that if you're writing to readers who are not in your head, they're outside, that you might need to make your ideas more concrete so that they can pick up and understand them. So figures are fabulous for that. Tables are great for that. So some illustrations, like literally visualizing so that people can see something that looks to be concrete. But you can also do it through metaphor, through analogy, through describing things rather than saying the metaphor that always comes to mind is lips as roses, right? Her lips were roses, brings up something, red and lush and or perhaps pink. But what that also does is it takes someone, something like, oh, she's got beautiful lips, right? Or she's beautiful, which is abstract, right? Beauty is abstract. until you give something concrete as a descriptor for it. Credible, that's crucial for your reputation building, first and foremost, but also for you to ground your own work in what has come before. So we establish the credibility of our ideas by grounding them in previous work and citing those sources. We establish the credibility of our data by describing our methods, presenting the data clearly, using appropriate statistics. We establish the credibility of our conclusions by showing that they grow from that credible data. And we build a chain that extends from past work into future directions. A break anywhere in that chain makes the whole endeavor lose credibility. There have been a number of pieces recently in the Chronicle of Higher Education and concerns about studies within the field of behavioral sciences that have seemed to have many broken chains. Many of these links are kind of off. And what happens if we start to build off of links that are broken or the studies can't be reproduced? The irreproducibility of research is one of those places where we see those cracks or those breaks. So we want to make sure that the stories that we're telling, we're building off of credible research. And then if we find that we've built off of something that's unstable, being able to go back and rework that, right? So that's part of then our retelling of the story. Emotional, right? I don't think that we have to have people weeping over our papers, but maybe depending on what it is that you're writing about, or depending on just the beauty of it. But really, what we're talking about for academic writing is getting people curious, engaged, where they get excited, they want to know more. All of those are emotions that we have with writing. You can think about papers that you've read that have been perhaps boring. I think tedious comes to mind sometimes with academic writing. What you can think about some of the other terms that you have. A dry, I hear a lot, right? And so if you're characterizing academic writing and the reading that you're doing as dry or tedious or boring, whatever the things are, note that those are all emotions. Those are all experiences that you're having with that work. And so the goal is, of course, to be able to have work that's credible, right? That's concrete, that explains things clearly, but also then engages the readers in their imagination, perhaps gets them curious and excited about what you're doing. So there's some skill to that type of storytelling and being able to lead your readers through the story of your research in an engaging way. And so basically, if you engage emotion by shifting your focus from what information do I have to offer to what knowledge do I have to offer? Phrased differently, you can shift from what's my answer to what is my question. And notice that if you pose a question, people generally want to engage with that. They want to answer, they want to respond. And so there are ways that you can build that in. So telling stories, and this is the last one that Schimmel mentions, and being sticky, right? And that kind of success model that he has. And he says, as you discuss your data and ideas, find units that you can package into coherent modules. And that some of that's about the logic in which you're going to be arranging things, but readers can then assimilate each piece, and it'll be easier for them to see how they add up and that they create the whole. So that requires that there's, again, a logic. There's some reason why you're arranging your data or your units in a particular way. And that has something to do with what it is that readers expect. So if we think about story time, right? Once upon a time, we want our stories to start at the beginning, right? And I'm going to go to a little bit of narrative theory, but I think this is easy to understand. And my hope is that you're like, oh yes, this makes sense to me also for my academic writing. This comes from Todorov, who was a kind of formalist critic, and talking about narrative theory and laying out what happens with story. He's not the only narrative theorist out there. There are many other theories, by the way, for narrative, but this one I think works best for academic writing and what we tend to do when we're going forward to create meaning. And so we'll take a look at some of those stories and how those are structured in a bit. But what happens is you start off with a place of equilibrium, right? So everything is as it should be in a story, perhaps. This is just equilibrium is just here we are, we understand the background and what's going on. And then there's some sort of disruption to that order. There's something that we don't know, perhaps, for academic writing, right? Like, here's the background. This is what we know. This is what we don't know. That would be the disruption. And then there's recognition that that has happened, so that there's this kind of our attempt to fix it and kind of what are we going to do about it? And then there's the attempt to repair it. And then there's a kind of restoration to order, meaning that we now have some sort of new understanding by having gone through that process. You can think about genre fiction, like mystery stories or romance stories or action adventure stories or fantasy stories. All of these science fiction, right? These genre stories have a very similar kind of circular kind of pattern to them, where we have this opening up to the characters are and what the story is about, and then we have something that a mystery that needs to be solved. We have a attempt to go through and solve that mystery, and then at the end, either justice has been served or there's some sort of a resolution, and we understand who done it. So that storytelling structure is very familiar to us as readers. And when stories don't follow that structure, and not all do, they are disruptive, perhaps with purpose, right? That they're breaking with that structure in order to do something new and show us something new. Memento is a movie, right, that goes backward and that has everything in kind of backwards order. So you can think about, like, why are they doing that? And usually if it's a skilled storyteller and they're breaking the rules, they're doing it for a purpose. You don't want to, however, be an unskilled storyteller and be breaking the rules and then confusing your readers. Right? So the four core story structures that Joshua Schimmel talks about are an OCAR, OCAR, an ABCDE, an LD, and an LDR. We're not talking about all of these. We're only going to be focusing on the one in the left column, the OCAR, and that's the opening, the challenge, the action, and the resolution. And if you think just what I was saying about narrative theory and starting with equilibrium and moving through disorder and then back into restoring order and equilibrium, you can see how this works. Opening, challenge, action, resolution. Those are kind of specialty journals. Proposals often tell a story a slightly different way. They start off with the action of, like, here's this problem in the world. Let me tell you a little bit more about that problem. This is how we are here to help work with this, and we're going to fix it. And this is why you need to fund us, because we have the skill to be able to do that. There's generalist news abstracts in the LD, and then the LDR, generalist publications. And these are more like when we're talking about writing for non-specialist audiences. How do we quickly get to the point? How do we get them to understand kind of the key and the essentials, kind of quickly get to the information without a lot of background, with a lot of not methods, right? Very few people, other than people who are specialists in our field, actually care about our methods, for example. So that stickiness, it can start with your title. And we're gonna go through and look at a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. For those of you who have done the abstract workshop or the right to publish workshop series with me, you will have seen this piece before. I love using it just because it's so illustrative of how to structure structure a story well, a research story well. It comes from Matthew Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert. And I use a brevia piece from Science. Science no longer does brevias, but they had for about a decade or so a brevia section where they would distill or have authors distill down larger articles into a one-page synopsis, which was great because then you could just kind of cruise through and get like a big picture of what that article was about. And so it's helpful for our purposes because all of these pink lines, these are all topic sentences at the beginning of paragraphs. And so we're going to use these now to talk about that OCAR storytelling structure that Joshua Schimmel mentioned, and thinking about like opening sentences and how it is that they open up for us. An opening sentence tells the reader what the paragraph is about. It'll also, in this case, when we talk about opening sentences, it'll open up as our introduction. So look for that. An opening sentence is also usually the topic sentence, and so that's what we're going to be focusing on in this brevia piece. It's the sentence that summarizes the paragraph, and there's no rule that says that the paragraph has to have a topic sentence, by the way. You can have paragraphs that don't have topic sentences, that don't have a point, right? They're illustrating or continuing to illustrate something that has come before. Maybe you're building off of something. And you don't have to have topic sentences at the beginning. Sometimes you can build to your topic sentence, and the point and the takeaway is at the end of a paragraph. And this is where I like Michael Harvey's point. He says, still, the beginning is the natural place to learn where a paragraph is going. And for us, because of the structure and that Killingsworth and Gilbert used for their Brevia piece, their points are all at the beginning of the paragraphs. It makes it really easy for us to see that OCAR structure, that opening, right? That moving through an action and into the resolution. All right, so this is our first paragraph. Of again, the title of the piece is "A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind," is their research, and they're psychologists in the field of positive psychology. And they say, unlike other animals, human beings spend a lot of time thinking about what is not going on around them, contemplating events that happened in the past, might happen in the future, or will never happen at all. So we have some context. Indeed, stimulus-independent thought or mind wandering appears to be the brain's default mode of operation. All right, so we have just a little bit. I have two sentences here, but it's indeed, they're kind of mushed together, so we're just going to call it close enough. But the stimulus-independent thought or mind wandering, this is our topic, and that it appears, notice appear, what that does, to be the brain's default mode of operation, appears suggests that there's something there that could be questionable, right? We're uncertain. We don't really know. So that's our area of study. So next, we're going to go to the next part of our story, which is kind of setting up the context of the study itself. So lab experiments have revealed a great deal about the cognitive and neural bases of mind wandering, but little of its emotional consequences in everyday life. So here we have this problem. There's this disruption, right? We need to know more. And here we have talking about some and the methods and what it is that they're going to be doing and how they're going to approach their study. We solved the problem of being able to gather real life data by developing a web application for the iPhone, which we use to create an unusually large database of real-time reports of thoughts, feelings, and actions of a broad range of people as they went about their daily activities. All right. And to what it is that they did in order to find out so this is, by the way, yes, and this is all one sentence, by the way, just I should let you know. It's a stacked, crammed full of information topic sentence, but it is literally one sentence and punctuated accurately. To find out how often people's minds wandered, what topics they wandered to, and how those wanderings affected their happiness, we analyzed samples from 2,250 adults who were randomly assigned to answer a happiness question, answered on a continuous sliding scale from very bad to very good, an activity question, answered by endorsing one or more of 22 activities adapted from the day reconstruction method, and a mind-wandering question, answered with one of four options. No, yes, 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 something pleasant, yes, something neutral, or yes, something unpleasant. Our analysis then revealed these facts. And so notice here, this is all, right, their methods and what it is. And I skipped over what was in parentheses when I read it. So the first thing that they found, first, people's minds wandered frequently and regardless of what they were doing. Second, multi-level regression revealed that people were less happy when their minds were wandering than when they were not. And this was true during all activities, including the least enjoyable. And third, what people were thinking was a better predictor of their happiness than what they were doing. Fascinating. They studied people at work, for example, and the mind wandering when they thought about other things, even happy things. They were actually happier if their minds weren't wandering at work, doing jobs that they didn't particularly like, which was interesting. So this is our conclusion, the wrap up, right? So in conclusion, now what do we know? What fills the gap? In conclusion, a human mind is a wandering mind, and a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. So notice that we have the appearance of something. Is it true? Do we know? To all of a sudden being able to, in conclusion, create some certainty. So that's where that meaning for this piece lies, is that we can now for certain say yes, that the human mind is a wandering mind. And when our minds wander, we're actually less happy than we would be if we were present. So those closing sentences, think about that. We just went back, right? The title of the article is "A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind." It kind of takes us back to that. And yet Michael Harvey reminds us, I just love his book, by the way, is like 75 pages. It's about college writing, but it's got some really good tips and just advice for folks, any kind of writer. So it's super accessible, and you can find a PDF copy online, just as an FYI. But he says that skilled writers do not merely repeat what they said at the beginning. The trick is to echo words or images right back, right, which you began with, while adding something that points beyond the text, that reaches to the reader's world. So there's going to be a couple ways that the text itself, right, what it is that you're writing about, the topic, and the words that are on the page will then reach out and connect with that reader. We talked about the power of emotion, or the need for emotion and emotional connection between readers and text. And again, if you're not thinking about the emotions that you're experiencing as you're doing scholarly reading or academic research reading, start to consider, like, how do you feel about this? We tend to go back to things that make us feel better than the things that make us feel worse, or kind of thing, so that might be helpful to kind of gauge. But also then thinking about in the ending and the conclusions of argument, an argumentative piece, and how it is that they bring their argument to a close, or what it is that they encourage you to take away or consider perhaps for future research. Does that get you excited? Does it get you thinking about new possibilities and new things? And so that reaching beyond goes to the reader's world and how it is that you're feeling, but also then what you're going to want to take away. And I want to go back to that OCAR storytelling structure with the opening, challenge, action, and resolution, and then kind of pull apart what it is that we just read through the Killingsworth and Gilbert piece. So in that opening portion, what we want is to have that kind of set of the background. We want to know who the characters are. We want to know who the story is about. Where does it take place? What our readers need to understand? And what's the larger problem that we'll address? And in Killingsworth and Gilbert's piece, it's pretty simple. It's a mind wandering and its emotional consequences. But the challenge is, what do we need to know, right? What do we have to accomplish? Is that we know little about the emotional consequences of mind wandering, right? And also there's a challenge there also with the methods, right? And being able to collect real-time data. The action itself, and what are they going to do what do you do to address that challenge? You can think about it again, like if you're setting up a mystery story, like there's this, a crime, who did what, you've got now the action of the detective hero, and then you've got some sort of resolution where, justice is served. Same, very similar structures here with academic rating. So what's that challenge? It describes the work that you did. In a proposal, it describes the work that you want to do, right, that you will be doing. And in the Killingsworth and Gilbert piece, what they did was they developed a web app, and they could check on things in real time and ask people were their minds wandering infrequently, and determine how they were happy, and that they were being able to understand where they were on those scales. And the resolution itself is, have the characters in the world changed as a result? Do we know something different now, having done this research? And the conclusion, what are we taking away? So what are those takeaways in that conclusion? And those three key findings, they're summed up as: a human mind is a wandering mind, right? So very simple, clear. I love the simplicity of this model from Killingsworth and Gilbert, but you can also get a sense of the storytelling structure, right? When things go out of order, they go kind of wonky, then we know that something's off in the story. And it could be with the story that we're writing, and that we just, in doing our kind of review of what our draft, we realize that something's off, or it could be in the structure of something that's published. Just because it's published doesn't necessarily mean that it's perfect, right? And there might be something off there that's kind of throwing you off kilter. But ultimately, writers give structure to what is highly unstructured. And if you think about your day, think about how you gather knowledge, what you know about your topic, and all the different ideas that are floating around up here that you want to get out into the story, That requires that you take something that's highly unstructured and just kind of floating around internally and give it some structure so that readers can understand it. So I'm going to give you something that's hopefully recognizable. And if not, I can send you clips. But um, I'm going to read this to you and just tell me where you think the structure is and what's going on, right? Just think about it. To seek out new life and new civilizations, these are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise, its continuing mission to explore strange new worlds, to boldly go where no one has gone before, space, the final frontier. All right. So this is the opening to it's actually the TV series of Enterprise, excuse me, Next Generation, Star Trek. So the Enterprise may go through all Star Trek series, but this one in particular, I pulled from the 1980s and 90s version. But it's still similar enough to all the other versions that I think that we can get it a sense. And we also know, if we're familiar with those TV series and the opening of Star Trek, that this is not in the right order. It sounds off. Even to seek out new life and new civilizations, you're like, okay, if this is the beginning, and then these are the voyages, it just automatically after that first sentence, we know something's off. All right. If we want to reorder it, if we put it into, this is my joke of making it into an academic kind of talk, we could get to space and all that's in orange, right? Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise, its continuing mission to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no one has gone before. That's in the orange, right? Those are all of our kind of hits. What happens if we clutter it and we make it less simple? It becomes less sticky and more bloated. So for those of you who tend to be wordy like I do, you might just want to think about like how can we pare things down and make them just a little bit more clear, a little more precise, and ultimately a little bit more quotable, right? If you're quoted, then you're cited. So, and my joke is right, the continuing of expansionist policies off Earth occur in space, which has been coined in the literature as the final frontier. What this project will show is that these are the voyages through which the off Earth territories will be explored, and these voyages will be situated almost entirely within the confines of the Starship. The Federation team has decided to call the Enterprise the mission of the Starship, its continuing mission, and it demonstrates the complex underlying and methodological approaches that inform this Enterprise's travels to explore strange new worlds. Additionally, the methodology includes another mission component, which is to seek out new life and new civilizations. This component is finalized with a specific mission aimed to go boldly where no one has gone before, which will lead to novel findings and contribute much to the field. All right, so you can get a sense here with all of the bloat and all of the, and this is a joke, right? That I pulled in academic language and sandwiched it to something that is in popular culture pretty familiar and pretty clear and straightforward. That bloat, though, also you can see and hear within that then that the storytelling structure still holds, right? Once we get it into order and we know that it's about space, the final frontier, these are the voyages. Once we get that in the right order, it does still flow well. And that's just a reminder image. But that storytelling structure, that opening, the context, the challenge, the action, the resolution, we have all of that within this Star Trek introduction. Space, the final frontier. This is our opening context. Our challenge is that these are the voyages. It's not exactly the same thing as but you can get the sense like they're charged, right, with a mission. It's continuing mission to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to go boldly or to boldly go where no one has gone before. The resolution is a little tricky, and people have argued with me about this before. I'd say the resolution is the punctuation mark and then the episode itself, right? That there's something that follows that kind of resolves this immediate storytelling structure. We don't have a clear resolution ultimately. And I hesitate to say that it could be in the action portion because if you say it's to boldly go where no one has gone before, that's also part of its continuing mission. So you would have to take all of this, I think, here, those last three sentences to make it the resolution. But if you have strong feelings about it, please put it in the chat and let us know. And so as a reminder, your writing process is not the same as the story structure. What we want is in this kind of left-hand column, we want to be able to go and gather our data and our evidence, and we want to do our own kind of interpretation, understanding, and we want to put it down and on the paper, page, and then create new knowledge, and then so that that knowledge goes out and creates some sort of new understanding in the world. Yes, and in kind of big strokes, from a 30,000-foot perspective, that might be the distance over time that we travel from gathering something that's new into an interpretation into new knowledge, and that new knowledge then is often makes a difference because someone else has read it and is building off of it. But I think in the moment, it's really hard for us to see that on the, in detail. So what we do is generally a recursive process of learning a little bit more, going back, writing a little bit, trying to figure out like, are we making the connections correctly? So it's all going back and forth and back and forth. So just note that your writing process is going to be different than the storytelling structure, which that OCAR structure, nice and neat, right? It takes your readers right through the story that you're telling them about and what they need to know, what they need to learn. Daniel Pink, I love his book When. It's this, Scientific Secrets of Perfect Timing. He talks about beginnings and middles and ends. And in that process, he shares a lot of data and a lot of information from different social scientists, but also hard scientists and humanists. He pulls it all together to kind of talk about what does it mean when we have a new birth or kind of a new beginning, or what does it mean when we're in that muddy middle and kind of stuck or kind of waiting to make a new leap or make a change or something like this. And then in the end, what do endings do? And he says that endings of all kinds of experiences, projects, semesters, negotiations, stages of life, they shape our behavior in 4 predictable ways. He says they help energize us, they help us encode, make meaning, right? They help us edit, change things around, make something different than it was before, and then they help us elevate, right? So grow, and this is a very progress oriented, right? Can we build off of something and kind of move towards something else? So I like these ideas of shaping our behavior and how it is that we will take action. In the chapter on endings, he talks about how many people at the end of a decade, like if you're 29, you're more apt to run a marathon than if you turned 32, but you're more apt to run a marathon at age 39, right? So there's something about the ending points of decades. There's no reason, it seems pretty random, except that people see the ending of a decade coming and they're more apt to take on a challenging task, right? Because they get energized, right? It's going to elevate their action. I also want to add something that I think could be better than just a happy ending or like, woohoo, this is what we found out, right? And this is what you can do to build off of it. That there's also, I'd like for you to think about poignancy. Again, thinking about what's sticky. Where is it that readers are going to want to quote you? Also, what is it that's meaningful? And if you have challenges with bringing your story together as kind of like one neat, kind of meaningful thing that people can take away, consider poignancy not in making it poignant, but at the elements of poignancy is that it combines a couple different elements. It may be that your findings aren't as robust as you would like. They aren't as clear as Killingsworth and Gilbert's, right? That you've got maybe some messy data or some messy things to sort out. And so what you can do is you can talk about poignancy or not do something like poignancy, which is where you have both. And here the girl with a virus, you can get a sense of like that complexity, right? You have image of a cute girl, and yet she's wearing a gas mask and she's staring at something, right? This kind of huge version of a virus. It's in black and white. So it strikes us in a particular way. And I think writing about complex findings in the end and doing it well, doing it simply and clearly is kind of like this. There's kind of a poignancy to it that it will stick with people a little bit longer. You got to do it simply and cleanly, but it's also about being demonstrating the limits of a study, perhaps. And in those limits are the opportunity to build something new, right? So you can always take what it is that's complex and do something else with it. All right. So I'm going to wrap our uh, webinar portion and the recording, and then open it up for a little bit of conversation for the folks in the room. But I want you to consider just for a moment, like, what are some of your takeaways? What are the things that resonated with you? What are the things that you want to start building off of? You've got some resources, you've got some recommendations and some structures, and now we can open it up for a little bit of conversation as well. But I thank you for being here, and if you're watching the video, I thank you for watching. And I'll stop the recording and